Nothing can stop me. I'm all the way up. All the way up. I'm all the way up.
I'm always vibing to this.
It's great.
Because you're all the way up.
It's a great way to start the day. So, hello, everybody. Excuse me. Welcome to the Money Matrix podcast, where smart money finds a smarter way.
Yes, it does.
No Good Morning Vietnam?
Oh, I didn't get there yet. We're about to get there. Good morning, Vietnam.
All right.
I'm Meyer Dalal.
I'm Ronan Fishman.
Alan Hastings.
So, our resident coffee drinker, Alan Hastings. So,
That's right.
today's episode is going to be featured on cracking the code with financing strategies for the self-employed and investors in today's market. So we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most important questions that the MBank clients ask us all the time. I'm a self-employed entrepreneur. I'm an investor. I'm a 1099 operative. I have money. I make money, but my tax returns don't always show what they need to show. I don't necessarily fit into that W-2 box. What can I do? How can I be secure? And how can I get qualifying at competitive terms? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. That is the most common question we get in the entire world.
And you know what's sad? The system today, the banking system, is based on an antiquated Fannie Mae process from 1935. When President Roosevelt was in office, 1935. And it's based on those types of, yes, they've obviously made changes throughout the time, but 2025 has much more as self-employed people, independent contractors, etc. That system was designed for the W-2 employee, for the wage earner, and then the rest of us were out in the cold.
Well, the banking system is not designed for self-employed individuals, right? I mean, they want to see taxes paid up front. You know, people get creative with taxes. People file in a certain way that is smart, not avoiding. They're just doing things by trying to capture all the credits, trying to capture all their expenses, trying to capture everything that they can in between. So you get kind of penalized for doing things in a very prudent way. And I literally just went through this. So before I left the other day, I wanted to go and get a haircut, took my son. I'm at a barbershop and I'm watching all these guys and he's like, Zell me the money, right? Great. So I Zell him the money. Now, how he handles that, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
From a tax perspective, I don't know. But I know that they're slammed. I have to make an appointment 3 days in advance. He's got somebody sitting on the chair literally every hour or so at an average price of $60, right? Let's say this guy's going at 10 hours a day. That's $600 per day. He's paying for his chair. That's his expense. He's paying for his commute. Probably that's an expense. But he's not paying taxes right out of that 60. He's going to render it either quarterly or annually. And that's where people fall apart.
You know, and people like that, we've helped so much. We've done, I just checked, over $2 billion in loans financed since we really started doing non-QM loans back in 2013, 14, 15, somewhere around there. And it's for self-employed people, W-2 people, and we've evolved so much. But yet you look at the Fannie Mae approvals, yes, they've evolved. Their technology has evolved. The way you can get approved, the way that they can validate your income. You know, now they have day one certainty where you press a button and then they can validate your income, your pay stubs, and everything like that. But if you're self-employed and you need to explain your write-offs, you need to explain what you have, typical underwriters don't understand that.
Okay, so I'm a barber. I'm making $100,000 a year. I'm doing my taxes at the end of the year. I want to buy a property. Let's use that $100,000 example. Okay, How much would I qualify for?
Now, is that $100,000 net after you wrote everything off?
Let's call it net.
So, again, multiple factors, how much you're putting down, but you're probably going to qualify
What's the minimum
for,
we can get away with?
in the non-QM world, 10%.
All right, 10%.
But your rate tends to be higher, so it evens out at about 15%. But you're looking somewhere
what does
around.
that mean? evens out at 15%. Say that again.
Where the rate won't be as high, where it doesn't make sense for you to just put down the extra 5%. Majority of the clients we have that are in our world tend to have more money for down payment, tend to have more money for reserves, just because of the nature of the businesses they have and the cash flows that they have. So $100,000 income in today's market is going to qualify you for somewhere around $500,000-$600,000 home.
Okay. So I'm putting in on average probably 75% down.
25% down.
So you said 10% to 15%.
Yeah, no. So 75% doesn't matter. It's 85% financing. We're lending you 85, and you're getting 15 from you.
Okay, great. So now I need to come up with $75,000.
Oh yes, sorry, 75,000.
Right,
yes.
$75,000. So I've got a mortgage of $425. Plus, you need to account for closing costs. So the client will have to, let's say, average it out to 4%. So really, the client's going to need about 20% down, close to $100,000 to close on that $500,000 mortgage.
Somewhere around there, unless you can negotiate the seller concession. So there are things that we're going to get down later
can't
on.
glance over that, because that's one of the most brilliant things that we do in house that nobody else does.
Yeah.
And I need you to explain sell, because especially if we got people listening from other jurisdictions and other countries, which I know we do, they don't have that in Canada for sure.
Yeah, Canada for sure. They don't have
But they have that. Explain that, because that's a really interesting process. Had I known, I would have saved myself pre-tax dollars. It's up to 6%.
Yeah.
Right. Oh my God, it makes me want to vomit.
Just on a high level, and then we're going to get into it later on. But basically, what we do is we work with the realtors, your buyer's agent, and we help them negotiate what's called the seller's concession. So if your home is listed for, call it $500,000 or $550,000, and you want to negotiate a certain price, and you negotiate down $25,000, instead of taking the $25,000 as a credit, where you'll save maybe $120, $140 a month on your monthly payments, I tell all of our clients to take that same $25,000 they negotiated as a seller credit. It's a net to the client, to the seller anyways, because they're selling their home. They're still giving $25,000, but that $25,000 is a dollar for dollar pickup for the buyer. So they're going to have to come out of pocket with $25,000 less a month. Now, cost them $140 over the course of 24 months. What's that? 20. It's about, $3,000, somewhere around there. So an extra payment of $3,000, because figure they're going to end up refinancing in a couple of years. So it'll cost them about $3,000 extra in payments, but they've saved, instead of $22,000.
So let me recap. If, let's say, on that $500,000 home, you can negotiate, instead of taking the price down by 6%, which is $30,000, you're saying, seller, I'm going to leave the price as is, but you're going to pay my closing costs and whatever else to the tune of $30,000. Now, that extra $30,000 on a month-to-month mortgage payment, we calculate around $140. So if you divide that by $30,000 lift that we're getting, it's going to take us approximately 24.
No, more than that.
No, 24 years.
Yeah.
To get that back. So yeah, absolutely.
No, it makes sense to do it, because you're going to end up refinancing in only 2 years. But you always start the negotiation as a price reduction. You don't start it as, I want you to pay for my closing costs, because sellers don't comprehend what that means. They're saying, oh, he wants me to pay for something. I'm not paying for it, because they think they have to come out of pocket with money. But if you negotiate it as a reduction in the price, sellers are always in tune and understand that the buyer is going to ask for a price reduction.
Right.
So psychologically, that's the best way to go at it. You do it that way. And then when you write up the contract, you tell them, listen, instead of taking $25,000 off the price of the home, I'm taking it as a seller concession, keeping the price the same.
The way we used to do it in real estate, and it's exactly right, is you ask for everything up front. And when they start giving you pushback right away, you say, just give me a sign back, because talk is cheap. You want to see it on paper. So you want to see them cross things out, initial it, and say, okay, so at least now we know where our starting point is, because everybody kind of wants to meet in the middle, but you don't have to start meeting in the middle. And it really depends on where the market is. Buyer's market, seller's market. I'd say more in a buyer's market today than has been over the last 2 years, where you can negotiate. You're not just throwing in blind bids and hoping to buy. So then you push hard on the price, and then when you find that, you're like, okay, look, I'm okay to pay that price, but in order for us to just finalize one last detail, let's get the seller concessions. So yeah, you're right. You never start.
Yeah, it's with the realtor that really ultimately negotiates it, but it's a strategy that you have to plan with your person who's doing the financing, because you have to know what the numbers are so you can be effective.
Right.
So we have 4 segments we're going to jump into today. First of all, we're going to discuss the economic landscape as a whole and what it means to our key buyer segments. The first segment is the first-time home buyer with self-employed income. Then it's the first-time investor with self-employed income who's looking to build wealth. Then you have the step-up buyer who wants to upgrade their primary residence. And then you have the experienced investor who wants to expand their portfolio.
Which one do you fall into, Alan?
Yeah, definitely the experienced investor trying to expand their portfolio.
All right. Talk to that. What are you going to do? What are you waiting for? Are you on the sidelines?
There's no sidelines, not at the moment anyway. Like you're saying, I think it's a buyer's market as well. So to me, if you sit around right now, you're missing a pretty big opportunity.
Can you still see us? Because it says camera's not working.
Nah, it's fine though. I know what your face looks like. I've seen the episodes.
All right, great. So you can't see us, but we can see you, and you're looking at a
That's
black.
all that matters.
That's all that matters, anyways. We're prettier than
All
you.
that matters. That's right.
So, as an investor, as a first-time home buyer, as anyone who is in the market, there are a couple things that people see right off the bat, and they get worried. Oh my gosh, recession, stagflation. Oh, Trump, Powell. What do you listen to? What don't you listen to? What's the, where do you block and tackle, and where do you just forge ahead? I mean, you're from the younger side of the world, and I want to know what your perspective is. As a first-time buyer, you're going to be coming up. Alan's getting married, God willing, at the end of the year. So, that's going to be a conversation. I mean, what do you, being in the business, what do you look at? What do you see? What do you feel? And talking to your friends who are not in the business, what are their sense?
I think Ronan hit the nail on the head in a previous episode where he says buying a primary residence is less about the market and more about your life and your situation.
Lifestyle
which
choice.
I think, yeah, it's important to know like exactly what you're mentioning, right? Getting married and settling down, having kids, that's the kind of thing where you need a house for, regardless of what the market looks like. But ultimately, like I was saying to Ronan, it's definitely a buyer's market. And if I was planning on, making that first purchase, and if I was planning on like trying to gauge the stance of where I should be and where the market is, I think the first thing that I look at is property values and sales. It's like when we look at Zillow's numbers, for instance, for the year, and you see that houses are flying off the market at record pace and up in value. It's one of those things where you could see, maybe things are a bit too hot. But at the start of this year, with all of the tariffs and all of the different policy changes, markets have cooled down so much that we're seeing home sales. What was it in March? Like 14% of contracts were canceled or something like that. Like the houses are not flying off the shelf.
That's not a true indication, because they don't tell you the whole story when you see that and you flash it. Historically, they've been around 12, 13% of contracts, but they just have to flash it to show, hey, the economy is having a hard time. But I agree with you. It's definitely slowed down. And
Yes.
and speaking to what you're talking about, something that's so interesting, in 2022, the market, 26% of all purchases was by institutional investors, like BlackRock as such.
Right.
In today's market, it only represents 14%. So some people, I mean, I'm curious, before I say what I think, what do you think that represents?
So I'm a big proponent of, that the institutional purchasing of homes like that. Like I'm not a conspiracy theorist as much, but I think that that's one of those things where you can follow that indicator for a lot of things. We saw it in Texas and such in 2023, and in 2022, we saw like massive tracts of land being developed into homes and bought up in bulk by companies like that. Maybe the purchasing has slowed down because the numbers pencil less. Like you've been talking recently about, rates and market rents being a little tougher to balance out, but I don't think that that's stopped, and I think it's going to pick back up again.
What are your thoughts on
So I don't think the purchasing went down nearly as much as the development has slowed down. And that's a function of multiple things. Scarcity because of COVID that we're still kind of shaking off. And material costs moving up, anywhere between 50 to 100%, depending on what materials we're talking about. And depending on jurisdictions, Texas was a unique one because they saw a removal of all barriers to development. And they really you bought a parcel, you want to develop it, show us your plan. As long as it meets, we're good, go ahead. And that's like, when you're talking to somebody like Alan, who's sitting in California right now, that's a foreign concept because it could take 3, 4, 5, 6 years to just get approvals. Never before you threw a shovel into the ground. So that's why. So the scarcity kind of went off. And another unique thing that happened is labor. Highly unionized labor jurisdictions, they went on strike. I know that happened in Canada for sure, right? And they asked something like $5 per hour increase for the next 3 years. So if you're a pre-construction person, you've developed this land, you've sold a contract at, let's say, $500,000, took 20% down. You're not going to be able to actually build that out for 2-3 years. Now you're pricing in increases that were never on your pro forma, regardless of your contingencies. You're backwards, right?
100%.
So I think that's a major proponent of what is actually happening on the ground. I think people are still yearning and needing more access. We need to build more, and that's actually not happening because there's way too many restrictions. It's part of the platform for Trump, removing all these barriers across the board, not just in development, but that's a hot topic item, right?
For sure. And something that, I look at this as tremendous opportunity because imagine in 2022, 1 in 4 homes was bought by an institution. So
Wow,
anything that was in the market, 1 in 4 homes.
Wow.
Think about
I
that.
didn't know that.
So you're competing with a BlackRock. Now, for BlackRock, their numbers don't pencil like Alan was saying. So now instead of being at 26%, it's 13%. But for the first-time buyer, for the first-time investor, they don't have boards to answer to. They don't have investors to answer to. They don't have a public corporation that analyzes everything they do. There's opportunity.
Yeah. So honestly, I hadn't thought of it in that way. You can pivot and move quickly. I'm going to tell you something from very, I don't want to say fortunate, smart, astute real estate investors. All started with not being smart or astute. They knew that real estate over a long enough time horizon is going to pay off because there's a constant yield on it, right? So when I talk about your primary residence being a lifestyle choice, I mean that. Like you can move by the identical house 15 minutes away because the schooling is not zoned the same way, or the neighborhood is still, changing or whatever, and you can have an immediate lift on value. So it's a 15-minute drive to wherever you're going. But here's the difference. Those ones that wanted to get into the market, they use the idea of they're buying their second and third property kind of in the same way that they thought of when they bought a home. So when they bought a home, they're like, I need to live somewhere, so I'm okay with paying the mortgage. So it's fine. When you're buying your second property, it needs to pencil. It needs to be cash flow positive or else they don't get approved. But they use the philosophy of that whenever I buy that second home, somebody's going to need to live in it as well. So as long as the numbers cover, they bought. They didn't try to time a market. They didn't try to do any of those things. They used that philosophy, but just kind of extrapolated and removed the emotional aspect of purchasing when you're buying your primary residence. Yeah. And then they just did that over and over and over.
If I could also say too, sorry to jump in, this was a unique set of years, right? Because with the election that came up and all those different things, maybe they were priming to take advantage of, a different market, right? Because real estate, like you're saying, is such a long-term play. Maybe they were short-sighted and maybe we capitalize on the Trump election and then they'll shift back, right? So this window might not be open for long, right? Maybe it was a strategy shift.
Could be. I mean, who do you know that can accurately time a market? Nobody, right?
If anybody can, it's probably BlackRock.
Yeah, okay, fine. They can make a market. There's a big difference between the two. I'm sure they have like an army of analysts that's going to do that. But making a market and timing a market, because what if a tweet goes out tomorrow? Everybody live for free. Trump will tweet that that's it. All home costs are $200,000 across the board. Buy now. A moratorium on sort of lift, and they'll credit back the developers. I mean, who knows, right? Obviously, that sounds crazy and sounds a lot like communism. But I mean, that could happen. We can't time. We didn't time COVID. We didn't time any of these other things.
You know, I want to present.
thought.
I'm into the stats. This round, I did a lot of research, and according to the Fed data numbers that have recently come out, your 30-year rates are hovering somewhere around 6.7, 6.8%. Your non-QM rates are anywhere between 7.2, 7.3 to as high as 8.1, depending on the type of occupancy, etc. For the first time, we've seen a 27% drop in the last 6 months between the gap between conventional and non-QM financing. So the opportunity now is much more prevalent in that self-employed space, because they're realizing, according to the performance raters, that these loans tend to perform better than your FHA loans, conventional loans that have minimal down payment and minimum skin in the game.
Why?
Because by nature, our portfolio, for example, our average loan is 20% down. Our average credit score is 704. Our average yield is somewhere around 7.63, somewhere around there, over cross section, right? So now, if you have 20% skin in the game and your average debt to income ratio is around 27, 28, you know, our debt to income ratio is less than half or almost half of what our max allowable is. Whereas your FHA conventional loans, a lot of them are capping at 48, 47, 46.
Okay.
You can sometimes get higher approvals, but you're putting 3% down, 5% down. You have no skin in the game.
Right. So
Anything happens,
you're gone.
you're walking away.
Yeah.
It's much harder to walk away from a 20% down. And we require 6 months worth of reserves. FHA, you can spend your last dollar. You can walk out with no money, and it's fine to qualify.
Gotcha.
Makes a big difference.
And there's very strict parameters on who qualifies for an FHA loan.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a W-2 employee. That's
No, you can be self-employed, but
Is that
you
right?
know, there's certain criteria and qualifications. You know something also, Alan, and then I want to move on. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time. I looked at the Case-Shiller Price Index to show the year-over-year appreciation. Nationally, it was 5.3%. Now, the states that really stood out, Florida was 7.2%, Texas was 6.8%, Arizona 5.9%, North Carolina 6.5%. All of these states have one major thing in common. A lot of people are moving towards them.
Yeah.
They have jobs. They have, you know, fairly political climates that seem to be stable. That's big markets. That's opportunity. And within those markets, you have huge opportunities that come into play.
As we record today,
Yeah.
April 28th, I'm not going to say who, but depending on the Canadian election, I think one way or the other, one more than the other, obviously, there will be a massive movement from Canada down south if the election turns a certain way.
I'm sure. I mean, it's obvious. It's clear. So let's talk about, Alan, this is where you step in because of the underwriting aspect of it. What are the challenges that self-employed borrowers, contractors, investors, their biggest challenge is what? Documentation. Documentation.
Yes, 100%.
That's really what we're looking at. A conventional mortgage is very simple. For the most part, your W-2, you have a pay stub. You submit your last 2 years W-2s, one pay stub, and a bank statement, and they run your credit, and you're pretty much good. But with bank statements, it's very different. I mean, in the conventional world, the stats come out and show Fannie Mae says they're, according to their own research, 16% of mortgage applications from self-employed borrowers are denied because of income documentation, not because they can't pay it, because they don't have the proper documentation, or their documentation, their tax returns, they have too many write-offs, and they know they make the money, but they just can't qualify them based on that, just because of documents. So what's the difference about being self-employed? Obviously, your tax return shows your accountant's tax strategy. It does not show your ability. What we look at, Alan, you want to share it, the way it looks and how we do it?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head. Basically, your CPA could be as creative as they want, and that's what your tax returns show. But your ability to repay is shown by your bank statements. It's your cash flow. So we'll look at, in the case of a bank statement loan, 12, 24 months, whichever you choose, and we'll see exactly how much money you make, what your expenses are. We'll do the math. And no amount of creative, tax write-offs are going to change that you made X amount of dollars that year. Same with 1099s, right? Whatever your expenses may be, we see you made this much money that year. It gives you the full ability to repay that you earn, not what your accountant is claiming for the IRS.
I got a question. Let's say you're a realtor and you have, it's cyclical. You have solid 6 months, massive checks coming in, and then you have 6 months of nothing. Do you average it out throughout the year?
Yes, we do. As long as there's a good explanation for, why 6 months were incredibly strong and 6 were not. There are seasonal markets, but yeah, 12-month average.
Is that for 2 years or one?
12 months.
You can choose. If you do 12 months, it's easier. 24 months, you might even get slightly better pricing on, but most people go the 12-month route for ease of documentation.
Oh, that's the other thing that nobody talks about. How many times have we seen the administrative fatigue where they're doing, one of the big banks, and every time they're asking me to prove something else. Every time they need a new piece of paperwork, and they're like, you know what, forget it. I'll pay an extra 25 basis points, 50 basis points, and I'll just get approved. And that people don't talk about enough.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's constant. They call it mortgage fatigue. It's a true term.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I call it a colonoscopy.
Yeah. For first-time home buyers, you have typically FHA allows you to have 3.5%. Conventional allows you to have 3%. We're at 10%, but typically it's 15%. But look at this stat from Zillow, which is pretty interesting. Zillow checked the median down payment for first-time home buyers nationally is at about 7%. But for self-employed borrowers, it jumps to 15% because of the perceived risk. Now, for me, I'd rather take a self-employed borrower with bank statements any day of the week.
I was just going to say that this is going to sound maybe like a hot take, but if you had the choice between someone who is employed by someone else and someone in charge of their own business, who's more in control of their cash flow? You know what I mean?
That's a good point. I mean, you can make the argument either way, but yeah, when you have some control over what you eat, what you kill, and kill what you eat, yeah, I get it.
I can't get fired if I run the business. That's it.
From a investor perspective, how do we treat first-time investors? How do, what's the criteria? I mean, what do we look for?
If you're talking first-time investors, I think primarily what we look for is good credit and good housing history. I mean, being a first-time investor usually involves extra skin in the game, a little more down payment, things like that. Just because you haven't proven yourself, it's almost like getting a credit score, right? Where you haven't taken credit, your credit score is not going to reflect that you can handle credit. So it's a doable deal, and there's programs for that. But I think ultimately just a little more skin in the game is what that would require.
Yeah, but understanding the person, understanding who they are is so important because of the fact that being an investor is new. So you're risking the fact that they don't know much about what they're doing. So looking at a cash flow analysis and bank statements, to me, makes much more sense. If I'm making a business decision, I see the cash flow. I see if the renter doesn't pay, do they have enough money to come out of pocket and pay for it?
So, okay. We're talking about opportunities and first-time home buyers and first-time investors and all these things, right? When you are a first-time investor, I think it's just like kind of inherited that there's this confrontational dilemma between the banks that want to lend money and the investor, right? And it's like, I want to buy this, but they don't want to give me the money. And if you're really thinking it as an investor that's a little more seasoned, especially for the newbies, you want the bank, you want MBank to be as thorough as possible, because we're essentially doing the due diligence for that client, right? And if we can't not finance the deal, you probably want to steer clear of it. And it's not, and that's what I like to do when I have conversations with people at the front. I tell them, we want to give you money. We want you to, no, really. I mean, that's how we make a living, right? We want to find a creative way to give you money, but not at all costs. Because what's going to happen is that we're both going to end up, we're partners in this regardless, whether you like it or not. In fact, we've got a larger share in the deal than you do.
That's right.
If you look at it from an investor, I'm not talking about a lifestyle. I'm not talking about a home that you're going to live in.
Yeah.
And you're like, this pencils, it pencils for us, it pencils for you. Don't fight us on the rate, because that's the risk premium we put towards giving you the money.
You know, conventional rates and non-QM rates on non-owner occupied are pretty much parity, maybe a quarter point different.
Yeah, I always have to still.
Yes, no, you check that. So I want both of you guys to chime in here. I have right now from Freddie Mac the data that shows what percentage of applicants are approved for first-time investor loans through the conventional channels.
Percentage?
What do you think their approval percentage is?
75%.
Alan?
Ooh. Yeah, I'm going to go with like 70%. Yeah.
53%.
Oh. So 1 and 2 get rejected.
Yeah.
And then what happens? They scramble.
And then they
it's
come
too
to
late.
us.
Yeah. But how much time do they need in order for us to be able to still execute? I mean, we've done deals quickly, but that you don't want us to be rushed either, right?
No, I mean, listen, we've closed deals in like 13, 14 days where they're like, that's it. We have but we have everything. And I tell them, I need everything. You can't even delay me one bit. I need everything. We try to get the appraisal assigned over. You know, another segment though, I want to talk about, which we get a lot lately because people are starting to get out of that false narrative that they have to stay in their home because they have a 3% rate. They're unhandcuffing themselves and stepping up. They either want to keep the home and try to keep it as an investment, or if they need to sell it for the down payment. Alan, can people buy the home and keep it? I mean, what are those are the common questions. Can I keep my home and buy another one? What do we strategize on that?
Straight away, yes. The answer is yes. I mean, if you're going for a new primary residence, you're just going to have to carry the weight of both those loans. But the thing is, you can use rental income from the old primary to help you qualify. You know what I mean? Like, there's ways to strategize it as an investment for your new purchase. If you're staying in the old home, there's ways to strategize it if you're buying the new one as a primary, renting out the old one. I think what you're mentioning, though, is important, that trying to do the two homes because you're locked into this 3% rate, trying to weigh yourself down just to keep this 3 is sometimes it's silly. And I think we're now at the point years later where enough equity has been built where those COVID loans may be worth you cashing out or selling, because you have so much money that's sitting there that 3% is like you're saying, handcuffing you from so much money. You should always be thinking about, the actual math, not just the 3.
See, I disagree wholeheartedly. They should be looked at as standalone investments. I'm actually the exact same thing you're talking about. I had a 90-day lock on my rate at 3.25, buying down peak COVID. Okay, locked in a 30-year at 3.25. If I were to rent it out in market rates today, I'm probably looking at a $3,000 to $4,000 lift on top of my carrying expenses for the house.
If you can qualify, of course.
If I can qualify. But
yes,
regardless, now that house that I'm living in now is the investment. The other one is the lifestyle choice.
Correct.
So I get to choose. First of all, can I carry it? Secondly,
a lot of people have cash in the home that they need that money to move on.
So if they were to
get a second mortgage from us,
correct,
and pull out the money,
that makes a lot more sense, right?
Keep the property, and a lot of them have the cash flow to do it anyway.
Second mortgage, your tenant.
Your tenant's paying it.
Bingo.
Because if you're at a low rate, anyways, your tenant's going to pay your first and your second, and you're still going to be able to have two homes.
I am the prototype for this thing because it's exactly what I'm going to do, right? And the next house that I want to live in is a house that I don't want to move out of. So it's a lifestyle choice, and I'm willing to pay for it.
So, Alan, before we get into the types of loans, I just want to say last quarter, $8.2 billion of loans were originated using bank statements, 1099s, asset utilization, and DSCR.
Yeah.
So it's not
That's a
so
lot of money.
much an alternative. It's now becoming much more mainstream.
Yeah, I don't talk to, if anyone asks, are you an alt lender? I'm like, no, we're an A lender in the non-QM space.
Exactly.
I would also like to ask a quick question, because if you think about FHA loans and a lot of those conventional loans, I'd wager the loan amount's a lot smaller too. I think once you hit a certain barrier, a certain amount, a certain loan size, that number percentage wise, you're seeing a lot more. You're seeing a lot more than just, 8-10%.
Absolutely. So we can qualify with bank statements, 12, 24 months, business or personal. We'll qualify you with your 1099s. We'll use 90% of your gross 1099. We don't even need a tax return. We'll qualify you with your assets. If you've just sold your company, you have money in the bank, stocks, bonds, whatever it is, and no cash flow, banks will look at you and tell you you don't have a job. I had a client who sold his company for $30 million. Big bank told him, I'm sorry, you can't qualify. You don't have cash flow. You don't have a job. He said, I can buy the house in cash 5 times over. Sorry, it's one of our requirements.
You hit something that I don't know if I wanted to, because I think it's a detailed conversation, but we should at least touch on it. 1031 exchange. Does it apply in this scenario, even though they sold a business?
No, because it's not a property. You can
Unless
only
they buy
exchange.
like for like.
No, it's a business.
But what if they bought a similar business that's more expensive? Because I heard of somebody, I guess they own the real estate and the business was part of the
It's
real estate.
different.
So they sold it all together. And then instead of having to pay $30 million in capital gains, they ended up rushing to buy an apartment building for more because of 1031. But can you explain how a 1031 actually works?
I mean, ultimately, it's basically kicking the can down the road to deferring your capital gain tax
But you
on
also-
a property.
But do you also capture back the depreciation on the asset?
I'm not 100% sure. It depends on, that's an accountant thing to do. But from a financing perspective, you're basically saying, I sold the property for $6 million. My cost basis is $1 million. I've made $5 million. I have to invest and re-up that ante to have that money back out so I don't pay any tax on that. So you just keep kicking the can down the road so you don't pay any property tax. Capital gains tax. You just buy another property like for like. If it's an investment property, it's got to be investment property. You can't buy a primary residence or a second home when you just sold an investment property.
Okay. And that's what, 120 days or is it 90
You
days?
have, I believe it's 120 days to identify the property, and then you have a certain period of time to close.
Right. And the same rule applies for primary residence. If you're buying a home, like you sold your home and you've got, you
don't get a 1031 on a primary. You get a exemption, like if you're a married couple, I believe it's $500,000. If you're an individual, $250,000 on the capital gains. Yeah.
What's the capital gains tax? It's 25%, I believe.
25, 28, something like that.
Wow.
Well, it's long-term capital gains tax is that, I believe. You want to check that real quick, Ellen?
Yeah, I can do that. But while we're doing that, I remember the deal you're talking about where the guy sold the business. They walked into the bank and they just said no to him, and he had
Straight up,
unbelievable money in the bank.
he didn't even know what to do with himself. He's like, "Are you guys kidding me?" He's like, "I just deposited $30 million into this bank. What's wrong with you?
You could probably service it through the interest.
You're crazy."
Yeah, fun fact for you guys: long-term capital gains tax right now, just according to the IRS and a couple Google results, taxed on 3 different rates: 0, 15, or 20%, depending on your taxable income and filing status. So it changes.
Can you pull that up for Canada? Do you mind?
Wonder.
I know the answer. I just want you to do it, just so we can do a contrast.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to read the IRS website. Interesting. Okay, so
Yeah.
Canada long-term capital gains tax. Let's have a look. Only imagine. Wow, 50%.
Wow.
Is that real?
It
Is it
was
really
I-
50%?
So you want to hear something better?
Yeah.
It didn't go into policy, but Trudeau kicked that up to I think it was 66 or 75%, and it just didn't make it through the House, and he was resigned. But just those words alone decimated the real estate market. Not that it didn't need another kick in the teeth, but it took one.
And the last loan, real
Unbelievable.
quick, before we get completely sidetracked, for our investors is the DSCR loan that qualifies just the rent, and that's it. Simple. We don't need tax returns. We don't need anything of the sort.
And that applies for foreign nationals.
Foreign nationals as well. So this is your favorite topic, Ronan. We're going to talk about the price negotiation, seller concession, a little bit more in depth. But this is interesting. Ready? According to Ellie Mae, who is one of the larger like origination software platforms, Ellie Mae's Origination Insight Report. The average conventional loan takes how many days to close? Alan?
45.
Close.
60
Ronan?
days.
47 days. And on average, we're closing loans in 23 days.
Wow. That helps out a lot when you see a deal. And always people ask for deals, but I'm like, unless you can pull the trigger now on a deal, it's gone.
For
Somebody
sure.
will.
And this is the whole part of the leverage, the negotiation power. And just by default, you have to have more skin in the game because you're in the non-QM space. So when you're going in and you're offering 20% down versus a regular FHA loan or conventional loan of 3% down, sellers are going to take you a lot more seriously. And you're going to have more leverage and negotiating power. Your offer is going to be that much more robust and stand up. So just by default, a non-QM buyer has more leverage and more ability to negotiate with a seller just because of the parameters of their loans and the fact that they're putting that much more down payment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, so
100%.
and then what also we really look at and what I tell the clients too is look for listings that are stuck, that are over 30 days, close to 40 days, because those are the sellers that are going to be wanting to really negotiate. Either they're just overpriced and they're crazy and they're not going to drop,
Right.
or you can find something. The ones, if you keep looking and updating for the new listings that hit every day, there's 100 other people, 200 other people doing the same thing.
Right.
You know, so those are negotiating things that I talk to about the clients as well when we're structuring that and when we're structuring the seller concession. And most importantly is when we structure our seller concession part of the closing is I talk about closing time. If you come in and say, I'll close 21 days or I'll give you a no loan contingency, just an appraisal contingency, then you have that much more leverage. So we'll underwrite your file, we'll clear the file, and we'll get it ready so you can now go out and make your offer. And then you go to a seller and say, listen, you're on the market 45 days. I'm putting 20% down. I have no loan contingency. I'm closing, and I'm closing in 21 days, but you need to knock off $50,000.
Even though you're still getting financing, it's still considered a cash offer.
Of course.
Yeah. That's so cash is a common misconception of people that don't do business in the United States. They think cash is cash, like you have to put it down on the table. Wrong.
Yeah, 100% wrong. If no loan contingency means the seller doesn't care where you get your money from.
Right.
At the closing date, you better have money from somewhere, somehow.
Right.
Otherwise, your down payment's at risk, obviously, if
Right.
you're putting down. Now, once in a while, what I also tell the clients to do is beef up their initial deposit on the onset. You know, the standard is 1%. That's the standard. Sometimes 2%. You know, sometimes I'll tell clients put 2-3%.
I never tell clients to put less than 5.
That's your real estate mindset
well,
because
that's exactly right.
it's a
Now
much
you gotta
stronger offer.
incentivize two people that want to make the deal done that don't have emotional skin in the game. So a good realtor does not get emotional about the transaction. And the one that usually does better for their client is the one who's willing to lose the deal. If you're willing to walk away from the deal and the other one feels it and wants it, that's when you're going to get a lot more support from the other party, right? So 5% minimum is what I asked for. It also was more attractive. It shows more skin in the game. And you talk about days on MLS. I used to go into listing presentations thousands of times. And I used to tell the clients one of two things. Here's the market. Here's where I think we should be listed. Here's where I think we're sold. Market is the one that we cannot control. Seller generally will spend about 15 minutes to an hour explaining to me why their house is 10 to 15% more valuable than the neighbor just sold because they have custom cabinetry that came from Italy. They have toilets that flush for themselves and sing the national anthem and yada, 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 yada. I'm like, that's great. That was for you, but that's not the market. So we can do one of two things. You can chase the market down if it's going down. If the market's moving up, you're going to sell anyways. You can price it at $1. You're still going to hit market value, right? But those days on MLS, every single day, like you said, 30, 45, 60, triggers something in the buyers saying, look, you're not moving. I'm not the one telling you that. Your realtor should have told you that. You're not moving. You're going to accept an offer or you're not going to accept an offer.
But psychologically for the seller, every day beyond 30 days, psychologically is like a ton of bricks on your head.
Of course.
Constantly weighing you down. And that's the strategy I tell all my clients. Don't rush. Just because it's a brand new home just came on the market. Okay. Look at it, but really try to see what else there's out there. See the opportunities. And that's where you can negotiate. And that's where you can get leverage.
And that's where you get the difference between a realtor and a great realtor. Because they'll take that emotional aspect off the table and give you that kind of advice and say, let's hold on to this, right? And when you find a good realtor, you stick to them because they are incredibly hardworking people as long as they're seasoned in the business. You have to be at least 3 to 5 years in the business as a real estate agent for me to at least accept you as a realtor. If you've been in it 6 months to a year and you've done a deal here and there, you're doing a massive injustice to your client.
No, I agree. Any other thoughts, Alan? Concerns, comments?
No, it makes complete sense that, closing speed is just as big of a weapon as extra down payment. I agree with you guys.
Yeah, fatigue. Sellers get fatigued. Keeping the house clean, having to be shown, disrupt your life.
Yep.
Like, absolutely, that matters a lot more than people think. How much do we do things on a day-to-day basis purely out of convenience? And this is a massive inconvenience.
And I'm going to finish with this last story here because this is so important. We had a client in Texas who was negotiating with a builder, and they were down on a price. The price of the house was $795, and he wanted $750, and the builder would not come off $1. I can't. I have to maintain the integrity of the community. If I come down for you, this is a problem. And the buyer's like, there's no way. I can't do it. I got to get something. So the realtor kept pushing back and trying to navigate. And then I just called the realtor. I'm like, listen, your closing costs are $40,000. Texas is a high state because you have the taxes are up front and everything.
Right.
I said, present it to the seller and tell him, look, you want $40,000 towards the seller concession. Your sale price stays the same. No one knows that you gave $40,000 seller concession. So for all intents and purposes, Mary, Bob, and Joe think you paid $795 just like they did. They don't need to know that you got a $40,000 seller credit.
Right.
So the realtor went back and negotiated it, and the seller agreed. He didn't get 40, but he got 30.
Brilliant. That's amazing.
So that's something that you just have to think a little bit out of the box, like you said. And that's sometimes the difference between a great realtor and an average realtor.
Same thing on the mortgage side. Like I've talked about this.
I was going to say.
Like you have professionals and you have hobbyists. You just have to figure out which is which.
Right. That's a great analogy for
what
we do as well. I mean,
It's true.
that
How many people that I
like
know,
you're saying.
you know what's the most common reason I lost business in real estate? It went something to the effect of, well, my cousin just got their real estate license. Amazing. They're going to willing to do it for 0.5%. Okay, good luck. And then when they come back in a panic, I'm not talking to him anymore. They don't know what he was doing. Where was he working for? For his commission cut, and you fell in love with 1% on a $2 million purchase? So yes, there was a discount that, by the way, you didn't pay directly to me, $20,000. So you thought you were willing to risk $20,000 for $2 million? Great. Good luck.
So I think we've had a nice long conversation today. Anything we want to leave with, Alan, Ronan, before we cut off?
who's winning the Canadian election? I just want to know as Americans, do you even know who's running?
It's Carney and what's his name? Trudeau. Not Trudeau.
Oh God, no.
Polyev.
That's right. So who's winning?
Carney is going to win.
Alan?
I'm on Team Carney's going to win as well, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to circle back and see how good the coin flip went.
428. Yeah, we'll write this down.
All right.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Send us off, Myra. Do.
All the way up.